So I'm Luis Vargas. I'm originally from Spain. I came here with a scholarship from the Juan Mar Foundation to work with a professor by the name Tom Sati, who was at Wharton at the time. And I've been in Pittsburgh since 1979, working with Tom Sati on different issues on a theory called the Analytic Hierarchy Process and related topics. So the AHP is based on three principles. One is called decomposition. You decompose the problem into parts from the more general to the particular. For example, think about you buy a car. You think what are the criteria important for the car, and then at the bottom you put the type of cars you're going to buy. The second one is called measurement. You're going to say how important the criteria are. We're going to do it in relative terms. You compare cost versus maintenance, how important it is. We get a priority. Priority is value between 0 and 1 that add up to 1. And then third, after you get prioritize everything, the criteria and the alternatives with respect to the criteria, you synthesize. So the synthesis has to be in such a way to be able to make a decision. So those are the three principles that we have. Of course, the scale we use is 1 to 1 to 9, 1 to 9 scale. 1 means equal, 3 is weakly important, 5 is very strong, 5 is strong, 7 is very strong, and 9 extremely important. But that scale is only about us being homogeneous. So the AHP is used exactly for that, for studying complex problems that it has multiple criteria and that require measurement in relative terms because there are no scales to measure them. For example, the concept of comfort, which car do you like better? Safety, how do you measure safety? So the AHP allows you to basically measure intangibles and study how the intangibles relate to each other and how they contribute to, for example, alternatives. So you may, for example, decide on where should I settle. I put a fund, a waste, nuclear waste in a given location. You have to decide about the different natural problems that you might have of national security or environmental standards. There are no scales for measuring all that. So the AHP allows you to basically do those measurements and they get an idea with experience and knowledge and judgment of where you think that you could put that. Now, it doesn't optimize the solution, it's a satisficing solution, as someone used to say, but in general, the AHP is very flexible. It can be used for many different issues. It can be done, for example, making personal decisions, buying a car, getting married, we don't know, getting married. It can be used for investments. It can be used for resource allocation in companies and portfolio decision. Now we are using it in particular in conflict resolution for deciding the preferences between the two parties in terms of the different outcomes they can have. And so they want to have, you want to measure how far the preferences are to decide if there is a possible outcome in which they can agree. So the way that this process, conflict resolution, works in groups here is that you bring representatives from both parties, not from the extremes or the more conservative area, maybe it's 70% in the middle, and you have to ask them to develop these structures on, let's use the word concessions for what each party gives each other. So they develop concessions, and those concessions have to be prioritized in terms of benefits, cost, opportunity, perceived benefits and perceived costs. Now, when you do these comparisons, people get together from both parties in separate rooms, actually, and they do comparison. They use preferences, and the comparisons are called pairwise comparisons. So in the AHP, you compare for example, two concessions, A and B, and say which one do I prefer in terms of the benefit, and you give a judgment in terms of a scale 1 to 9 developed by Tom Sati. What we have been doing is trying to use the hierarchy, the AHP, to analyze the conflict using this idea of relative measurement to establish the preferences of Israelis and Palestinians in terms of their preferences for defining what a treaty should look like. So this treaty, based on these preferences that we have observed, came out around to define something we call the Pittsburgh principles. And these principles deal with borders. It deals with the rights of both parties to exist. It deals with the refugees and their rights and how you take care of that problem. It deals with security issues. It deals with prisoners in one area that had to be turned over to the others. So in total, it's about 11 principles. The last one is about saying that end of the conflict when all this is taken care of. So one of the issues that we're trying to address now is the refugee issue. So how do you address the people who have been displaced, who want to go back, because the Palestinians want to have the right of return. They will not give up that. Right to return means that I want to go back to the land I owned before. Now, of course, if you allow all the refugees that are existing today in different parts of the world to come back, Israel will be overcrowded, and the Jewish people will be a minority, and they don't want to do that. So obviously only some of them will be allowed. So the part of the conflict that we are addressing now is that the refugee problem, which has to do with how do you develop principles and guidelines to address the refugee problem, and then at the same time it's how do you compensate them, because it's agreed upon that in the conflict, in the agreement of this treaty, that they are allowed to be compensated for part for suffering or becoming a refugee, and then for their losses in terms of property. To be able to develop guidelines for to deal with the refugee problem, the way we did it is as follows. So the principle is you like to address the refugee problem with a just and fair manner, but the guidelines is that what do the parties need to do to get to agree to develop these guidelines. So basically what we did is we said, okay, we're going to develop benefits and costs of concessions I'm going to give you for the refugee problem. So for example, I'm going to allow people who were displaced registered in the registration of refugees, UNRWA. I'm going to allow them to come back to Israel, but they can only bring, for example, one member of the family. They cannot bring the whole entire extended family. So they make concessions of that type, so that then the question is, after you do that, is what should the final decisions be by the Palestinians and by the Israelis that can be written together as guidelines. So, for example, they can decide we're going to establish an international commission that will allow us to do the compensation component. We would like to be able to find out how do you get funds to do this. So where should the international commission be created? What should the rights of the refugees be? The right of the right to return to Palestine or stay in the countries they want? So basically, anything that relates to the refugee, it has to be prioritized, but of course, the theory doesn't tell you exactly how it should be written. The parties need to write what they agreed upon in these concessions they give to each other.